Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and we are still chugging along through Lyme 5, the book I helped write when I was working with Mark Crutcher at Life Dynamics in Texas. And the section we're on now is the section on women who wound up having hysterectomies after an abortion. Only one of these cases involved a death. I already had it very well documented, and that was Mary Pena, who underwent an abortion in December of 1984 at San Vicente Hospital in Los Angeles. She had thought she was only 3 months pregnant, but the doctors discovered she was at 22 weeks. After the abortion, she was bleeding so heavily that they performed a hysterectomy to try to save her life, but it was unsuccessful, and she died early the next morning on the operating table. Now, San Vicente was owned by Edward Fast Eddie Allred, the Ray Kroc of abortion. He's credited with inventing the assembly line abortion. He managed to slip Mary's body through the morgue without an autopsy. But when her death certificate went to Kern County Health Department, they refused to accept it because women her age don't just bleed to death from natural causes. So Mary's body was brought to LA County for an autopsy, and that was when it was revealed that she'd bled to death from cervical lacerations. And this is why I think that there are a lot more deaths at FPA than I even know of, because it seems like every couple of years I'd learn about another one that I hadn't known about. I had thought that there were 8, then 12, now we're up to 18. In addition to Mary in 1984, we had Denise Holmes in 1970, Natalie Myers in 72, Patty Chacon in 84, Josefina Garcia in 85, Lenise Dorsey in 86, Joyce Ortenzio and Tammy Sumatsu in 88, Deanna Bell and Susan Levy in 92, Christina Mora in 94, Tatanisha Wesson in 95, Nakia Jordan in 1998, Maria Lejo in 99, Kimberly Neal and Maria Rodriguez in 2000, Chanel Bryant in 2004, and Kyla Ellis in 2014. So, and National Abortion Federation. And this guy admitted under oath in a deposition that he never did a preventability study after a patient death. I guess his attitude is you have to break eggs to make omelets. Now we have a non-fatal case where I do have documentation. In their April 4th, 1991 episode, 60 Minutes covered the ordeal of Suzanne Logan, who was left mute and paralyzed after an abortion performed by Gideon Kyoko at Hillview Women's Medical Center in Maryland. Suzanne subsequently died of her injuries. But in this episode, 60 Minutes also covered the case of Linda, whose boyfriend described the situation. He said the clinic owner, Barbara Lofton, who was passing herself off as a doctor, met him when he came to the clinic to pick Linda up and said that the doctor had hit an artery. The boyfriend said, I went in the back and they had a sheet wrapped around her bottom like a baby diaper, and she was just blood everywhere covered. She was just lying in her own blood. Linda nearly bled to death and had to undergo an emergency hysterectomy. Now, the rest of the cases, please follow the link below if you can help me get... I know that the source documents exist. I typed up all these summaries from the source documents when I was at Life Dynamics, but it was a room full of filing cabinets. I didn't take them with me when I left. What can I say? So these are non-fatal cases, but I need the source documents. This one's Los Angeles County. Gladys went to a Planned Parenthood in 1973, and they referred her to a clinic where she underwent an abortion. And the doctor documented that she sustained minimal blood loss and tolerated the procedure well. Actually, he performed an incomplete abortion. She required a second procedure and 2 days later underwent a hysterectomy. Then we have a case in St. Louis, Missouri, where a young woman underwent an abortion in 1978. During the procedure, the doctor, we called Irma Rowe, so it was a woman. Irma called another doctor in, but she had such a thick accent that Bonnie had trouble understanding what was being said. Bonnie said they were awfully excited and jumping around and I was scared to death. Bonnie remembered screaming, but then her memories became blurred. She was moved to the recovery room with what she referred to as the second batch of abortion patients and given pills to take. Later, she was told that she can get dressed and go home. Now, 2 weeks later, Bonnie was at a concert She started bleeding. At first she thought she was just menstruating, but by the time she got out to her van, she said there was blood sloshing in and out of my shoes, and I was still trying to convince myself that this was just a heavy period, that everything was going to be all right. She laid down in the van and covered herself up with a blanket, but she just couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, so she started honking the horn to summon help. A policeman came over, and when he saw how badly she was bleeding, as Bonnie put it, he started screaming on his little walkie-talkie for them to get an ambulance there immediately. And Bonnie was rushed to a hospital for an emergency hysterectomy, and she remained hospitalized for a week. And we have Carol, who was 36 years old when she underwent an abortion in 1978. She suffered a perforated uterus and had a hysterectomy and lost her left fallopian tube and ovary. And somehow she sustained nerve damage, resulting in permanent numbness and tingling in her left leg. Then we have in January of 1981, Judy went for an abortion. And by April, she concluded she was still pregnant. She called the clinic. She returned on April 8th for a second abortion, but they weren't equipped to do abortions that late in the pregnancy, so they referred her to Harold Hoke in North Carolina. So Judy and her husband scheduled an appointment for 8 o'clock the next morning and drove to Hoke's clinic. Now, he performed a procedure which was likely the lethal injection, where they inject the drugs into the fetal heart to kill it, because he also gave her other injections, which he said would induce labor. After several hours, she still hadn't gone into labor, so Hoke told her to just run to the procedure room. She did, she said, but she passed out when she got there. Meanwhile, her husband's waiting in the recovery room, and every time he checked the front desk, staff said that she was fine. After 7 hours, Mike insisted on seeing his wife. It was then that staff finally called an ambulance, and by the time Judy got to the hospital, she was in shock with no measurable blood pressure. Surgeons opened her abdomen. They found it full of blood from a 3.5-inch hole in her uterus through which a 22-week fetus had been shoved into her abdomen. Parts of Jane's intestine were also lacerated. It took surgeons 5 hours to remove the mangled uterus and repair her intestines, and they had to provide multiple blood transfusions. Fortunately, Judy did survive her ordeal and was discharged from the hospital on April 16th. Then we have Andrea, who went to Laurel Clinic, run by Dr. Mylan Vooch, who's another, he is a hero. When this guy died, he got more praise than Mother Teresa and Mr. Rogers put together from the pro-choicers. They love this guy to bits, because he was doing illegal abortions openly to challenge the D.C. law. And that's all you have to do is abortions, and they love you to death. Even though he kind of malpracticed women to death. I think it was Wilma Harris and Jeannie English, if I recall correctly. So Andrea went to his clinic in 1981. He did an abortion and lacerated Andrea's uterus. And then in violation of state law, he brought her back to an area of his home that he designated the clinic annex. 2 days later, he took her back to the clinic and then discharged her. The next day, she went to the emergency room reporting severe abdominal pain, and exploratory surgery revealed a laceration through her vagina into her abdominal cavity, where surgeons found a mass of necrotic fetal tissue, and surgeons had to remove Andrea's damaged uterus. Then we have Roxanne, who went to a clinic in Pennsylvania in December of 1984 for a 16-week abortion. Afterwards, she was transferred to a hospital where surgeons found blood in her stomach, a large hematoma encompassing the whole pelvic sidewall, and tissue extruding through a 3-inch uterine laceration. A surgeon treating her noted that it was virtually impossible to repair the defect and also repair the uterine artery and vein that was traumatized by the abortion. Therefore, a hysterectomy was performed. And the last one, I did find some documentation. I have another case of Nancy, who went to Fargo Women's Health Organization and went through an ordeal there. And there's a mention of this young woman in one of the articles about Nancy. But I would like a copy of the court case. She went to the clinic on May 10th of 91. Dr. Robert Lucy did the abortion. Afterward, Tamara bled profusely. Her blood pressure plummeted and she drifted in and out of consciousness. Now, she said that the clinic staff told her to squeeze her legs together and attempt to clench her vagina, as if this was going to stop internal bleeding. When staff tried to move her, blood just gushed out. Tamara's friend demanded that she be taken to a hospital, but instead Dr. Lucy insisted on performing another D&C to try to stop the bleeding. Tamara's friend again demanded that the staff do something, but during this period the clinic was being picketed pretty heavily by pro-life protesters, so they waited until the protesters left before they called an ambulance, and by then it had been 5.5 hours since Tamara was injured. She later recalled being wheeled into the emergency room with people around her shouting, "We're losing her, we're losing her." She required several blood transfusions and an emergency hysterectomy. Fun times for everybody. You can always have another baby later, even though you no longer have a uterus.